We've been waiting to see what Pope Leo XIV would do regarding appointments to the Roman Curia. Well, we have the first round of appointments have been made. They've been announced as of yesterday afternoon. They're not great, to put it mildly. I'll show you what those are. First, I will tell you that I expect to see more of them maybe today. In fact, there's an old adage for media observers. If public figures, public organizations, governments, whatever, those kinds of organizations make a press release on a Friday afternoon, typically that's not good news. Usually they want to bury the bad news at a time when fewer people than ever are paying attention, and that's on a Friday or even a Saturday. So I expect you might see one today. The appointments we have, I'll just show them to you. There's names certainly missing because this is focusing on one dicastery. Michael Haynes from the Per Mariam blog and the senior Vatican correspondent for Life Size News, accredited member of the Holy See Press Office, and has written for other organizations, posted this to his X account. Pope Leo today, meaning yesterday, named many members of the dicastery for clergy, including Cardinal Tagle, Cardinal Arthur Roach, Cardinal Mario Gresh, Cardinal Aveline, Cardinal Frank Leo, Cardinal Stephen Brislin, and Bishop Eric Varden. The two names that people are grabbing onto as being generally positive are Bishop Eric Varden and Cardinal Frank Leo. I couldn't find much about Cardinal Frank Leo, so I'll talk to you about Eric Varden, and then I'll riff a little bit on the rest, as it were. What I saw yesterday in the aftermath of that news story hitting was traditional commentary outlets, figures, if they talked about it at all, they only talked about Bishop Varden. There was no acknowledgement of these other figures. Most curious, because as some more will say, those willing to kind of stare reality in the face at this moment are willing to notice there are 7 appointments, 5 of them are bad. That's not a good track record. That's 75%, give or take. But let's go talk about Bishop Varden. He's from Trondheim, Norway. Here's a couple things he had to say about Traditionis Custodes. This is from the InsideTheVatican.com, which is Robert Moynihan's website. This is something he published in the aftermath of Traditionis Custodes. He's got a couple quotes here from Eric Varden. It says, a bishop is but a link in a long, long chain which goes by the name of tradition. He looks back with attention, gratitude, and grace to receive what is handed on to him. He looks forward expectantly, wishing to convey, undiminished, the treasure with which he has been momentarily entrusted. What Pope Pius XII, told him, Archbishop Gianni Maria Montini, later Pope Paul VI, when Pius made Montini Archbishop of Milan in 1954, was, go and pasture your variegated, scattered flock. Find words and gestures they are apt to understand, but do not compromise. Have confidence that the deposit of the faith entrusted to you from of old will contain the germ of answers you need to address the questions of today. Live out of that deposit, dig into it, and deeply. Now, what you're going to find here is if you dig into just a little bit into Bishop Varden, he's a traditionally minded on matters of morals and that kind of thing, but he's a hermeneutic of continuity, Benedict XVI type bishop. And for many, that's good news. I'll give you the SSPX response to some things he said about tradition, because this is, I think, the view from the traditional Catholic side. This was published back in September of 2021 in the aftermath of Traditionis Custodes. Scandinavian bishops question Traditionis Custodes. I'll just go over this because it does refute the issue of the hermeneutic of continuity. It says the bishops of the Scandinavian countries are cautious about the possibility of implementing Pope Francis's motu proprio Traditionis Custodes in their dioceses. The text published by Pope Francis has given rise to discussions in the Nordic countries. The ban on celebrating the extraordinary rite in a parish church is considered to be difficult to implement by some bishops because in some dioceses, all the churches are also parish churches. They point out that the solution to the possible rejection of the Second Vatican Council by some of the faithful who attend the Tridentine Mass cannot be found in the ban. And that is true. You Those of us who question Vatican II and are very deeply suspicious of it will be made, have been made more so by these measures, not less. If bishops share concerns about a schism in the church due to the ideology of the rejection of the Second Vatican Council among some followers of the so-called Old Mass, such an attitude could hardly be prevented by prohibitions, Bishop Eric Varden of Trondheim, Norway, said on Friday, September 10th, 2021. It is now a great challenge to reinterpret Catholic ecclesiology on the basis of Vatican II documents, he added. The remark, the SSPX say, is very fair in substance, but this reinterpretation has already been attempted and has yielded nothing other than more or less serious deviations from Catholic theology. That's their retort to the hermeneutic of continuity, because it's true. The hermeneutic of continuity did bring us deviations from Catholic theology. It just brought it to us at 25 miles an hour instead of 100 miles an hour, like what the German bishops are doing. That's all it did. It was reform and revolution of the church in slow motion, as opposed to full speed steam ahead, like in Germany. That article goes on to talk about synodality, the world synods, and all the rest of that stuff. And I show you that because Bishop Varden is a conservative post-conciliar bishop appointed to the dicastery for the clergy. He is considered, he's probably the best of them. Now, we'll go here, because this is also about Fiducia supplicans. And this is an article from The Pillar asking what some of these bishops had to say, published right after Fiducia supplicans. And I'm showing you this to you for context on who this bishop is, because he's the one the traditionalist outlets and commentators are mostly focusing on while completely ignoring the horrifying choices made otherwise. From this Pillar article, quote, in a December 21st letter to priests of the prelatures of Trondheim and Trondmoso, Bishop Eric Varden reflected on, quote, the right practical application of Fiducia supplicans. An ecclesial act takes place publicly, following a ritual approved by the church. A pastoral act is personal, intimate, pertaining to the inner forum, he wrote. Here, then, we have a criterion for the application of Fiducia supplicans. If couples living in irregular circumstances request a pastoral blessing, the appropriate setting is away from the public eye, following the example of the Lord in the Gospel, who, when approached by a blind man begging to touch him, took the man by the hand and led him out of the village, there to lay his hands on him. The healing of the divine grace might touch that in him which was broken, without the brokenness becoming a public spectacle. End quote. So you have Bishop Varden open to the idea of blessing those parodies of holy matrimony, it seems, as long as it's not in the public eye. And I would be okay with a blessing for those in question if the blessing was go forth and sin no more. You have a blessing of the church to give you the strength, to help give you the grace needed to walk away from the situation you're in and those sins you're attached to. Go forth and sin no more. If that's what he's talking about, then fine. That does not appear to be what he's talking about. And he is one of the more conservative ones on this. I'll have the links to all these things I'm citing here at returntotradition.org after this live stream, or at the Anthony Stine Substack. You'll find them there in today's posts. Links to the description box of this video to either of those places. Now, let's go back to Mr. Haynes's unfortunate list here of people who were appointed. Cardinal Tagle. What can be said about Cardinal Tagle? He's the probably of all the names for I don't want to say superficial reasons, but for less theological reasons, probably the most cringe-inducing name there. The man can be an embarrassment publicly. He has been associated with World Youth Day, literally rapping on camera, like with some beatboxing behind him, and acting in ways that are generally unbecoming of a prelate. He also has a terrible track record for managing dicasteries and managing Vatican operations. But he seems to have been rehabilitated by Pope Francis after a failure on his own part before, and then a year out in the wilderness in the Roman Curia, brought back to run some things. His name was high on the list of those who were thought to have been a candidate for next pope, but it turned out he wasn't even in the running. It looked like it was Cardinal Prevost from the beginning. It was his to lose. That's what most of the credible reporting on this says. The next name on that list that is worth talking about is Cardinal Arthur Roche. Roche is 75. He has submitted his resignation already to the Pope, meaning at 75, your bishops of all stripes are required to submit their resignation because they've hit retirement age, and the Pope can accept or not their resignation. and he just got promoted. Now, I had seen a couple people defend this appointment saying, well, he kind of had the job already. His appointment ends next summer. You could just let him run out the clock. Sure. But if he was also wanting to just clean house, the Pope could have accepted his letter of resignation. It would have been completely procedurally fine. A few of us would have raised an eyebrow and taken it as a sign of hope. But his appointment is confirmed. For how long? Some say that the next year. It's an appointment for 5 years, and he was just named to that dicastery. My money is that his appointment ends in August of 2020 or 2030, or perhaps earlier when he hits 80, if the Pope then accepts his resignation. The next little name on the list, of course, is Cardinal Mario Gresh, co-relator general, co-head, basically, of the Synod on Synodality. He's one of the men who coined the term New Synodal Church. He was one of the men working with Cardinal Hollerich, who said that the Mass that developed organically from apostolic times through 1962, the traditional Latin Mass, yes, the earliest elements of the traditional Latin Mass were found in apostolic times. And no one is saying that the traditional Latin Mass that looks similar to the 1962 Missal was what was being said by the apostles, but it did develop organically from those times. You would find elements of that from in their early liturgies there, as have most liturgical scholars said. He was the one, though, Cardinal Gresh, said that the traditional Latin Mass, the Mass that developed organically over 1800, 1900 years, no longer fit the ecclesiology of the church. And when they started saying that, that's when I shifted my focus from purely restoration of the traditional Mass to zeroing in on what it is they believe. And they believe the church's ecclesiology, which is just a fancy word for the theology of the church in its view of the relationship of the church to God, the relationship of the church to man, the relationship of man to God, and the relationship of the church to the world and its mission in the world. That's essentially ecclesiology. They say it wasn't compatible anymore with the Vatican II ecclesiology. A new ecclesiology is essentially a new church. That's why they coined the phrase, the New Synodal Church. They coined that phrase, not some radical traditionalist commentator. They said this stuff. Mario Gresh was one of them, and now he got promoted to the dicastery for the clergy. Take this stuff seriously. These have consequences. The final name I'll focus on, though, here is Cardinal Aveline, Archbishop of Marseille, known to have been a close confidant of Pope Francis. He was considered one of those names that if he was the one who emerged on the loggia, it would have been only slightly surprising. He would have been a clear Francis II type. There would be no debating this like people are right now with Leo. Those are the appointments that were made. This is not good news. You don't have to take my word on this. I'll talk to you a little bit more about Gresh in a moment, but Dr. Mike Hickson posted this on her X account. Cardinals Tagle, Roche, and Gresh are bad news when it comes to the possibility of actually trying to restore the Catholic faith. And there's no other way to read it. There needs to be no balancing act between the factions in the church. If you're trying to hold the church together, you get the heretics out. You get them out quickly before they can do more damage. And instead, they've been given promotions to help essentially steer policy of the church regarding the clergy. Wrap your head around that one. It's probably worse than most of us realize. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit about why I think Gresh is possibly one of the more dangerous ones, because he's relatively young as cardinals go. And I tend to be a lone voice who doesn't think Pope Leo is going to be Pope for the next 30 years. People tend to think he's going to be, in terms of longevity, the next John Paul II. I don't think that's going to be the case. But this was published yesterday over at The Independent. Pope appoints Cardinal Gresh to dicastery for the clergy. Pope Leo XIV has appointed Cardinal Mario Gresh, Secretary General of the Synod and Bishop Emeritus of Gozo, as a member of the dicastery for the clergy, the Gozo Diocese has said. In recent years, Pope Francis had already appointed Cardinal Gresh as a member of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, that's your ecumenical dicastery, to the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura, replacing Cardinal Burke, and the dicasteries for the bishops and for divine worship and the discipline of the sacraments, the Gozo Diocese said on social media. We continue to promise Cardinal Gresh our prayers for his work for the good of the universal church. Cardinal Gresh is developing quite the resume. This could be a positioning him to become the Cardinal Secretary of State in 5 years, or for a good run at a conclave himself in a few years, should that happen. We, of course, wish Pope Leo a long, healthy life, one where he serves the church by implementing the will of God and not the will of an ideology or of a faction of cardinals, but aligning himself to the will of God. That should be everyone's prayer for him. Cardinal Grace, to me, is the worst of that, because Roach is retirement age. And men of retirement age in the church, well, not to be ghoulish about this, he's like 75. That's right around the average lifespan for an adult male in the UK, where he's from, right around there. So, not to be ghoulish, but I'll just say, pray that he works out with fear and trembling his salvation as per the scriptures, so that he be among the friends of God when it comes time to stand before our Lord. I want that same for me. Pray for him on that, because he's 75. He won't be out there terribly long. If he hits 80, it's pretty much customary at that point, with some rare exceptions, for a cardinal's resignation to be accepted. But that's Cardinal Gresh, Cardinal Roach, Cardinal Tagle, and a couple others that there is no real way of getting around. It's like 5 of 7 are not good. And it's curious to watch the reporting on this, because everyone is focusing on Bishop Varden, who is a moderate, basically. Has the faith. He's not going to sit there and attack people and try to destroy the sacraments or whatever, but he's a moderate in the grand scheme of things. And that's who they're grabbing onto, while the worst elements in the Francis circle get their promotions. And I'm telling you this on Friday, August 29th, 2025, early in the morning. Could happen today that we get more announcements of more promotions, more appointments. And there are a couple names everyone is kind of waiting to see what happens with. One of those, of course, would be Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. I expect him to keep his job. I want to be wrong. I will be happy and first to admit here on this channel that I'm wrong if he does not keep his job. It will not surprise me if we get that announcement in the coming days. But there's others too. There's the dicastery for essentially religious life, religious institutes, and the type. That's one to keep an eye on. If you've been watching this content for a while now, you know that the Vatican has this track record for the last decade of using various mechanisms to try to crush traditionally minded and conservative religious chapters, whether they are nuns or women religious or monks. They're dedicated to tradition or just too conservative in a post-conciliar sense. They get crushed by Rome at the first provocation. And it comes right out of that dicastery. So that's one to keep an eye on. The other is dicastery for the liturgy, where Cardinal Arthur Roach is the current prefect. The dicastery for the liturgy is where Traditionis Custodes came from. And of course, as I said before, Victor Manuel Fernandez, dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. Those are the big ones that we're waiting on. But I'll report on all these as they develop here on this channel. My red says, I would take those resignations with open arms. I would too. Cardinal Roach hitting retirement age, submitting his letter, is the perfect opening for a legitimate, peaceful, relatively low profile means of taking care of the Roach problem. But he's got a continued position, at least for the next year, maybe longer, at that dicastery. These are men who shouldn't be dog catcher for the Vatican, let alone holding any position of power. Kevin says they could have all been distributed across a broader range of dicasteries. There's that too. Now, again, we'll see. Yeah, Beverly Hamilton agrees. Gresh is dangerous. He is absolutely dangerous. I'm also keeping an eye on Cardinal Hollerich. We'll see what happens with him. Now, I think they close us down. Hey, that's what I think. If you're a women religious, I would keep an eye on the dicastery for religious. That's what I would do. That's where I would watch first, because they're going to be the policy implementers for everything, related to religious life. All right, folks, I'm curious what you think about all this. Let me know in the comments. This is not, of course, the only appointments. I've got another news video for you today coming soon after live. Most people watching this will be watching this after the initial broadcast, but my other video today is about the appointments of good bishops, the Burkes, the Sarahs, men like that, to these temporary appointments, personal envoy for the Pope to some cultural event in the diocese somewhere. And I think there's a reason for that, and I suggest you check that out. But we have another story here. Pope Leo has a track record now of appointing, at best, a mixed bag of bishops to various dioceses around the world. I've covered a host of the bad ones. Men who should have been run out of the priesthood, becoming bishops. Men who have said heterodox things about the James Martin sin, morality in general, all sorts of things, who are overtly hostile to the traditional mass. There have been some decent appointments too, but bad ones. And now we have what looks like another one. This comes to us from Gloria TV, who reports that a priest from India had been in Germany for most of his adult life, is being made a bishop. And he cut his teeth and learned his theology in Germany. Pray for this man. Headline from Gloria TV. Pope Leo XIV, open-minded Germany-adapted priest becomes bishop in India. The Syro-Malabar rite is in chaos right now. That's the predominant rite of Roman Catholicism in India. You have an issue there of priests battling, quite literally battling, over altar space in parishes in two factions. One that wants to follow Vatican II and Pope Francis in the good way, in terms of clinging to their traditions, keeping the integrity of the Syro-Malabar rite per Vatican II and per order of Pope Francis. I know it's weird to say, but he ordered them to follow the council directives and preserve the integrity of their masses. Meaning the Syro-Malabar rite looks basically the same as the Syro-Malabar rite would have looked 250 years ago or earlier. And then there's the other faction who want to Novus Ordo up their Syro-Malabar masses. More normal vernacular, priests facing the people, all sorts of other stuff. Vatican II expressly prohibited that with the Eastern rites, which the Syro-Malabar rite is one of 24, I think. This battle turns into real literal battles in streets in India. Priests pushing each other off of altars in the mass. Priests trying to use the same altar to offer two masses at the same time. Just mind-boggling stuff. Francis sent delegates there ordering them, using papal authority, ordering them to stand down, and they refused. Well, this is a bishop who is going to be sent there by Pope Leo to take care of this problem. From the article, quote, the Synod of Bishops of the Syro-Malabar Church in India elected Father James Pateril, 63, as the new bishop of the Eparchy of Belthangad. Pope Leo XIV has granted his prior consent and announced the nomination on August 28th. Monsignor Pateril has 4 brothers and 2 sisters. After finishing school, he joined the Congregation of the Claretians and was ordained a priest in April 1990. He studied pastoral theology at the Pastoral Theological Institute of Freiburg. First red flag. In 1999, he became a hospital chaplain in the Diocese of Limburg. Second red flag, which was ruined at the time by Bishop Kampfus, a figure who was considered anti-Catholic by even German standards. The current bishop of Limburg is, I believe, Bishop Georg Botzing, a man who I frequently cover on this channel, unfortunately. Hiding his priesthood behind civilian clothes, Monsignor Pateril served as a priest in various parishes in Würzburg, as well as acting as the procurator of the Würzburg province of the Claretians. He served in different bureaucratic roles such as treasurer, fundraiser, and coordinator of international projects, especially linking German donors with missions in India, Africa, and beyond. In an interview with the German news agency KNA in 2020, he described his community as very open-minded and allegedly missionary. There's your third red flag. We must adapt to the place where we are and not simply impose our own mentality and theology on the people. He also says we do not transport a fixed image of the faith from one country to the next. I don't know what that means when you in the context of the universal faith, but okay. As a role model, he cited the fiercely anti-Catholic Claretian bishop Pedro Castelliga, who passed away in 2020. He spent many decades in Brazil working in the Amazon. He came from Spain, but he was no longer Spanish at all. He was completely integrated into the Amazon region. That is something we are all trying to achieve, said Monsignor Pataril. What he did not mention about his champion, in 1988, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger clashed with Bishop Castelliga, a prominent liberation theologian. Ratzinger urged the bishop to abandon certain false doctrines and Marxist elements in his teachings, but he refused. So this new bishop for India, a country whose Catholic community is fractured over liturgy in ways that we can't wrap our heads around in the West, is a liberation theologian, essentially, or at least his hero is a liberation theologian, and the apple's not going to fall far from the tree. That's what we're dealing with. And he was just made a bishop by Pope Leo. So he's just like joining the cavalcade of all these late bishops that are awful. I wish I wasn't the only one telling you these things. Really wish I wasn't. I'll have the links so you can read these articles for yourself at returntotradition.org or the Anthony Stine Substack. But get ready for more of these, as well as a few decent ones and ones that'll be kind of bishops who will go in there, keep their head down, and just go be a bishop in their diocese, but will probably not challenge anything either, including things in the diocese that need challenging. We are in a strange place in the church right now. Evelyn says, I had been so stubbornly hopeful, but not now. We shall see. As I said previously, we're waiting on appointments to the Roman Curia. Maybe we'll get some good ones. We'll find out together. I'm curious what you think of all this, though. So let me know in the comments. Do you think that appointment to India of that bishop who was trained in Germany, was a liberation theologian as his personal hero, one who Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, when he was the prefect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, tried to talk sense to, tried to get him to abandon the worst elements of liberation theology, to abandon the Marxist elements and abandon some of the other heretical ideas, heretical ravings of the liberation theologians, but he refused. Is that a red flag? Do you think that bishop, that's enough to know what this bishop is going to do, or should he be given a chance? Maybe more radical ideas that don't cross a certain line will play better in India and he'll bring souls to Christ or whatever. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Just have that discussion charitably in the comments section. And I'm curious, though, in general, what do you think of all this? So let me know in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly does help. Sharing this on social media helps enormously, too. And as always, pray for the church and for everybody who spoke about today. Not trying to turn you against anybody. They do that a good job of that on their own. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.